Hello and welcome to our joint program with Real News and NewsClick. We have with us today Harsh Bandar and will discuss 1 year of Modi regime, particularly with respect to how it has affected the working people. Harsh, good to have you with us. We talked about in the earlier section the attacks on the working people. If we look at the kind of attacks we have seen on the constitutional values, do you think this 1 year period that we have had is qualitatively different from what the BJP, for instance, the NDA government did in the earlier period of Vajpayee, or do you think it's been a continuation of the same policies?
There were elements certainly of what we're seeing today during Vajpayee's regime, but there's a qualitative, in fact quantum difference given firstly the majority that they carry, and secondly I think the kind of openly majoritarian discourse around on the back of which this government came to power with this large majority. And thirdly, the personality of the Prime Minister himself, which is aggressive, aggressively majoritarian and authoritarian. And I think that all of those add up to a much more open assault on some of the most important constitutional values. The way I'd like to suggest we think about it, I see our constitution built around, in the preamble, the three principal pillars of liberty, equality and fraternity. In our last section we spoke a lot about the assaults on equality, and I'll set that aside. But let us look at liberty and most importantly fraternity. Briefly on liberty, the idea of freedom in a democracy, I think the essence of it first lies on the freedom to disagree with official policy. But what this government has clearly communicated, and with what I call a deliberate unsubtleness. It's not behind the scenes. It's very much upfront.
Quite ham-handed and open.
Deliberately ham-handed, in order to intimidate large segments of civil society into submission. So we welcome foreign capital, which has much more profound influence on the way we live our lives, on the way we think, what we eat, how we dress, etc.
What the media tells us.
What the media tells us. But foreign solidarities with any kind of questioning on grounds of equity, on grounds of sustainability of this economic growth model is seen as anti-national. So this discourse has really grown very shrill during this 1 year. And this was then followed up by deliberately ham-handed bullying of organizations which have not fallen in line. So that's one. But I think along with that, the freedom also to choose one's religious identity, one's food habits, and so on and so forth have also come under grave challenge. The Constitution had taken a lot of care to say that we have the freedom not just to pursue your religious faith, but also to propagate it. But now conversion is being seen again as an anti-national activity which needs to be criminalized, which needs to be blocked. The idea of Ghar Wapsi or homecoming suggests that it is only the Hindu faith which is truly Indian, and anyone who goes into Islam or Christianity, which they've done largely because they've not found social equality within Hinduism, is seen now as something that is again anti-national, and they need to be welcomed back like the prodigal son back home into the Hindu truly Indian identity. And the ban, say, on beef, which is not even, there isn't even a universal Hindu prohibition on beef. It is an upper caste, segments of the upper caste community of the Hindus who don't eat beef, but it's been imposed as you've criminalized dietary habits of religious minorities and of the lower castes through this ban, and telling you how you can love, how you can how you can marry, how you can have sex. All of this is one part of the assault on freedom.
You raise very important questions, that what the government does and what other groups under the protection of the government, not openly so, do. In fact, it would be argued that a lot of the attacks on minorities, attacks on issues like, for instance, the ability of young women and men to fall in love, all these are being done on quote-unquote other organizations, which could be in the larger sense talked about as civil society minority organizations as well, because they're not a part of the government. Now, this has been, in fact, also a part of what would be called mass censorship, that it is the mob censorship, rather more correctly, that you have a system of now mob censorship. So, in this sense, what do you see as a relationship between this quote-unquote mob censorship, mob intimidation, as well as governmental intimidation? How do you say this play out?
Surely, I think that this kind of rabidly bigoted majoritarian groups are no longer fringe. They've become mainstream. More and more they're trying to make the left liberal resistance to these kinds of groups are being pushed to the fringe, and this has become center stage, because this is clearly the ideology of the government formation, and the social organizations, the RSS and the hundreds of other organizations under its cover are basically flourishing under the protection of this larger umbrella. And we don't really have to go very far, because it is true that a lot of it is non-state actors. But I think what is significant is that the Prime Minister himself, maybe just about a year before he actually entered the race, his kind of discourse was not at all different from much of what we're hearing today. We might like to forget about it, but that's a fact. And Amit Shah and the kinds of people who have helped bring him into power. And to think that you can bring a genie out of the bottle in order to get elected, the genie of hate kind of organizations, and then you can comfortably put them back and cork the bottle, even if you wish to, and assuming that they wish to, it's not possible.
Let's go back to this point still. But of course, you talked about being genie out of the bottle and putting it back. But it's also what is called dog whistle politics. That means you say things which mean something to people who know and something else apparently to others. So that's been a kind of dog whistle politics we've been seeing. The double meaning that is used in different ways. But there is a even more important issue that you had raised earlier, that national movement, this is the stream which lost out. Yeah. In fact, Indian national movement rejected this stream which existed right from the beginning, right, and rejected this Indian unitary state based on religion or ethnic identity. That was what was rejected, and the Indian constitution really reflects what won out. Do you see in this victory of Modi the belief of a certain section that they now reverse that?
I completely see it, and I think that is the larger story of what we're seeing. We're seeing a sense of triumphalism. I mean, today is where Gandhi has really Gandhi, because he was symbolic of this belief system for much of the freedom movement. And it's not important that it was Gandhi, but that the majority of Indians, Hindu, Muslim, etc., followed the idea that India would be a country where, regardless of your faith or the lack of it, you would be a fully equal citizen in every kind of way, and that this country belongs equally to Hindus, Muslims, Christians, non-believers, and so on. I mean, I think that core idea has been defeated temporarily in the triumph with which Modi has come to power.
Do you think that's why Mr. Modi talks about how you're ashamed to be an Indian before now you're proud? Do you think that's really what he's talking about?
In Parliament, he talked about 1200 years of slavery, which he has come to end. What does that mean? That means that not just the period of British colonialism, but also the period where the majority of our rulers were Muslim, was a period of slavery, according to him. And he is, and combined with the idea of this 56-inch chest kind of thing, that he is the only man enough to be able to take on the enemy within, which is the Muslim, which is the Christian, and tame them. And
also secular nationalists.
And secular nationalists. I think perhaps first of all secular nationalists, because the liberal secular nationalists. So that he's been able to tame them and show them their place. So I think that what we are witnessing today, one can talk about labor reforms, one can talk about, those are sort of elements in this. But I do feel that we need to recognize that the assault is on a much larger idea of India, which goes much more deeper than the details, and it's a renegotiation of the terms on which minorities can live in this country.
How do you think the Indian people will respond to this? Do you see them accepting this, or do you see that there is every possibility of a fight back and recapturing that space?
I have great faith that the contradictions, as I said, are deepening, and they're deepening faster and more visibly than one had imagined. A year ago, Mr. Modi's triumphalism was seeming to suggest that it was a fort which could not be breached for a very long period of time. It's already showing many cracks. And I think that is because of the nature of the Indian nation. I mean, I do believe, and that has been a faith with me, which many friends disagree with. I think that there's a certain, it's been a very unequal civilization, and I think it is more than any other civilization, it has sanctioned inequality, and that's been our big problem. But it has also been a very inclusive civilization, and I think that, for instance, the Delhi elections, for instance, their results, I mean, one can speculate, but I do believe, and when I said this on television, I was really attacked a great deal by a whole set of BJP spokespersons, but I do believe that the attacks on churches hurt the majority of the Hindu community, because Christians are not more than 2% of our population, but I think they didn't like this kind of public expression of hate on gentle segment of our society. I think that the assaults on fraternity and the assault on the rights of farmers and workers will collectively, I hope that they build a solidarity. I mean, that we need to see that the Muslim, the Christian, the Dalit, the landless worker, the small peasant, the unorganized worker, all of them, or the factory worker who's being pushed out of any kind of labor protection, all of them build a solidarity. That is when the resistance will really have the impact.
Thank you very much, Harsh. We'll be with you again to discuss this government and what else it's doing.